Hello, I'm Chris Goffey and welcome back to the Citroen story. So far we've looked at how André Citroen set up his company in Paris to enormous success, only to see the whole organisation go bust in the 1930s with the huge development costs of the traction avant. The Citroen talent for creating breakthrough cars continued with the perky little 2CV, and in this final part of the programme we'll come right up to date, starting with a car that really was a rolling testbed. I drove it on my visit to the Citroen Museum in Paris. This is the museum's six-cylinder car from 1954, as you can see, in beautiful condition. But it's an interesting car because it was an illustration of what was to come for Citroen, because it was fitted with hydraulic rear suspension, self-levelling from an engine-driven hydraulic pump. It was really a rolling testbed, because in 1955 came the sensation. It's doubtful there has ever been or ever will be a car that has so stunned the motoring press and public as the launch of the Citroen DS at the Paris show in 1955. Crowds fought to get a look at this stunning machine. 750 orders were taken in the first 45 minutes, and 12,000 orders had been taken by the end of the day. It wasn't just the looks, the sharp nose and the sweeping aerodynamic shape were more than enough to impress. But under the stunning shape, things were just as revolutionary. The steering, the suspension, the brakes, the gear change, the clutch were all powered by hydraulics. It was the Citroen dream team of André Lefebvre and styling by, again, the Italian sculptor Bertoni. The result was just fantastic. It's almost impossible to exaggerate how breathtakingly spectacular these cars were. I've owned 3 of them, and even today it's still difficult to find anything to rival the sheer comfort.
First of all, it had so many innovations. It was the first production car with disc brakes. It had hydropneumatic suspension, which was revolutionary, and no one had ever tasted the comfort. It was like riding on a magic carpet, so to speak. The shape, the indicators, it was the whole package combined. A monocoque chassis whereby all of the body panels can be bolted on and off. You can actually drive around just in the shell of the car, and it won't actually affect the rigidity of the shell. It's quite incredible. You can even take the roof off.
What's so great about Citroen cars, past and present, is Citroen, I feel, used to build cars for people who wanted to feel special and different to the rest of the crowd. When they built the DS, it was so radically different to the rest of the people driving, for instance, Peugeot 403 and Renault Frégate.
What was absolutely astonishing when they brought in the DS is that the hydraulic system was the main power for the suspension, the brakes, the gearbox and the steering as well. You had 4 functions combined with a single source of power. This was absolutely a technical breakthrough.
One of the great design features of the later DSs were these wonderful lights. Quartz halogen, they were very, very bright. And the great thing was the inner spotlight you see there. When you turn the steering wheel to a corner, the light swivels, so you can actually see round the corner. Wonderful design idea, and it really worked so well back in the 70s.
Cars you have today, they have a front grille, they have fixed headlamps. Everything about the design of the DS is no grille, swiveling headlamps for later models, hydraulic suspension, hydraulic steerings. I would say UK people love the DS. From the past experience I've had with customers coming to look at the cars I have for sale or coming to obviously to buy the DSs, they've all said, oh, I've been waiting for years and I've been saving for many years to buy myself a DS. Usually it's because their father, their uncles used to own a DS. They used to ride at the back of the DS.
Now you only have to look at these cars and the memories come flooding back. When I was a young reporter on the Staines and Egham News, I borrowed a test Citroen DS23 EFI off the Citroen press fleet, and I was in heaven a week with a car like that as a young reporter. I went hurtling down to Devon in it. I stopped at a filling station, I checked the oil to make sure everything was all right, shut the bonnet, set off back down the road, coming up to about 80 miles an hour, and bang! The bonnet flew all the way back, bent on top of the windscreen, flattened down the roof. Tragedy, what could I do? I bent it back into shape and I did it up with rope and I drove back to Citroen. I said, I'm so sorry, it just came up on me. And they said, it's all right, so they all do that.
Right, the DS falls apart, and the problem areas of the DS is, first of all, there were cars built in the 70s where the rust proofing obviously was not as good as today's modern cars. The main area before you even consider buying a DS is to look under the chassis. The car is built like a box section. You've got to make sure that everything looks original, or if there has been any welding, it has to be perfect. Then you've got to start looking at the roof. The roof of the DS is made of fiberglass. Sometimes some roofs are made of aluminium, but the majority of them is made of fiberglass, sitting on a steel frame, and the seal obviously today's seals are pretty old, so they let the water in. The rain gutters, they also seem to suffer from rust.
Now, all DSs are beautiful, but some DSs are more beautiful than others. Malcolm Bobbito, lovely ID19 here, and it's an English car.
Yes, it's a Slough car. It was built at the Citroen factory at Slough. Opened in 1926, closed in 1966. This particular car is a product of 1960. And it's the ID19, which was the detuned version of the DS19, which meant that it was a little more simpler, which the English motorists, or should I say British motorists, liked, because when they opened the bonnet of the DS19 and saw all that plumbing, they were horrified. And when these cars were the same price as a Jaguar, and in around 1958, 59, 60, what would you have bought? A Jaguar. But they brought out the ID19, which was simply because it had a clutch, manual clutch, non-power steering, which was fine, but against
and a
the
proper four-speed gearbox as well.
And a proper four-speed gearbox without the mushroom on the floor.
They tell me that the site of the Citroen factory is now Mars.
That's
Mars
right.
bars.
Yes, Mars bars.
But when they left, they filled up the foundations with old gearboxes and engines and body panels from the old Citroen works. So what you and I have to do when Mars closes down is go back there with a pneumatic drill.
Yes, indeed, because trying to keep these cars on the road is always a job, and wouldn't we like to have lots of parts to be able to make the cars go on forever and forever.
So the owner of one of the most beautiful cars here, DS convertible, tell us about this car.
Well, thank you for saying it's beautiful. It is indeed. It's a 1965 DS19, which is the original version of the DS, which I bought about 7 years ago. It had been sitting in the corner of a Citroen dealer in Colwyn Bay. It needed a lot of work, as these things tend to. It had been written off after a minor accident in the 70s, and the owner of the garage had kept it, intending to restore it, but didn't actually get around to it, and it became an opportunity for me. So it's originally Chaperon, a coach builder in Paris, built them using the chassis and the front sections from Citroen. And I think he built about 1,365 of them, and about 100 of those, I say, were right-hand drive and came to this country.
The DS was to develop throughout its 20 years production run with facelifts, the famous steering spot lamps, fuel injection, estates, and even ambulance bodies. By 1975, when production ended, over 1.5 million had been built. It proved a tough competitor in the international rally world with a string of victories. Famously, in 1968, Lucien Bianchi was leading the London to Sydney Marathon when only a few miles from the finish in Australia, he collided with a spectator's car that shouldn't have been there. Talk about tragedy. Citroen's competition department flourished and continues to this day. Citroen knew the car was tough and was proud to show it in this promotional film where the DS keeps its cool, even when a tyre or two is blown out.
The shape of the future comes into focus with the latest Citroen. At a unique demonstration before press and public at Kyalami, SA Mirror takes a look at a ballet on 3 wheels, the wheel and turn of a Citroen cavalcade that spells out safety. The same startling safety factors are doubly impressive on a 2-wheel blowout. It's still a safe, controlled stop. Citroen's hydropneumatic system offers safety and convenience.
So Dale, head of vehicle design at the RCA, a very famous college for automotive design, surrounded by lovely shapes. What would your students make of this array?
Well, I think for many students, these cars represent the pinnacle of design at the time. I mean, an awful lot of students are still influenced by things like the DS even today. And I think when you look around at these cars, what you do see is a wonderful attention to detail and a wonderful amount of craft in the way that the cars are created and the surfaces are actually recognised and developed. It's very, very unusual.
And of course, they weren't derivative. I mean, you know, so many students, you see their work, and they've obviously taken their styling cues from something else. But this car didn't take its styling cues from anything.
Not at all. And what's really exciting again is that almost every model that's here, right from the 2CV, the DS, they're actually original solutions to real problems. And I think somehow we've lost that a little bit in the design business, where there is a lot of reinterpretation, looking at brand values and looking at the past all the time to find new directions. At this time, people were looking forward all the time and really being influenced by what was happening around them. So they were really responding to a social need, cultural need, and a need to find a new solution.
I mean, I have a theory that the motor industry researches too much and doesn't let designers have a clean sheet of paper anymore.
Yeah, I think the thing is these days is that actually the costs are so big that companies are really scared about taking a risk. If you look at how much profit there is in a car these days, it's very, very small. I think companies are beginning to recognise, though, that to be successful, they need to be individual. And also, the consumer is pretty sophisticated. They've seen cars that are based on platforms and moved around, and they're getting to recognise that. So I think companies are recognising they have to go back to their roots and really, really do have to be innovative to find new things.
You might have thought, with the design of the Traction, the 2CV and the DS behind him, Bertoni would have sat on his laurels, but he also designed the extraordinary Ami, another car destined to become a huge favourite with French drivers. Now, in my day, in the very early 70s, they had a thing called the Ami Super, which was this car with the GS engine in. And that was a riot in London streets because, although it looked like a funny old modified 2CV, it was actually quicker than a Mini Cooper. So you could really burn people off at the lights. Talk about a wolf in real sheep's clothing.
The ME6 is a strange thing. Some people think that it is related to the 2CV. It is not. Technical, they use the basic thing they had learned by 2CV. But the ME6 is a result of Citroen's, it is a mark at this time which had 2 models, the 2CV on the one side and the D models on the other. So between the ID19, which was the lower model of D series, and the 2CV, there was a big gap. And it was planned to have a new car in the middle, a mid-range car. And the fruitful thing they made, this was the ME6. For the first time, Citroen had a mid-range car between these two after World War II.
Now, when I joined Autocar magazine as news editor in the very early 70s, to my great delight, my first long-term car was a Citroen GS, just like this. Flat 4-cylinder engine, beautiful aerodynamic shape, and with the DS-style hydraulics, it really was a great little car. Citroen at this time were experimenting with the rotary Wankel engine. They installed some in some Ami coupes, and they even built a version of the GS, the bi-rotor, with the Wankel engine. But it wasn't successful. They couldn't cure the emission and the fuel consumption problems, and in the end, they abandoned the idea. But they did try it in a helicopter. And to prove it, here it is. Bizarre sight in the middle of Citroen's own private museum in the centre of Paris. But this was a revolutionary helicopter, very, very lightweight, a very compact power unit, and it worked extremely well. The helicopter actually flew on flight tests for quite a long time, but there was just no money to put it into production. Another great idea. The more I walk round this place, the more I find cars that I deeply and enviously covet. This is the mighty SM, Maserati engine, fantastic power steering. I was lucky enough to drive an SM a great deal in the 70s. It's finger light at parking speed, just one turn of the wheel from full lock to full lock, and at 100 miles an hour, it's iron hard. fantastic car. You can buy one of these for, well under 10,000 quid. I want one now. Those SM Lynes were to play a part in a much more successful car from a sales point of view, the DS replacement, the CX. Some would say it's less revolutionary than the DS, but it looks good, has the Citroen hydraulics and a futuristic dashboard. Sold well too in both petrol and diesel and in saloon or estate versions. Later on came the GTI and the Turbo, making the CX a very quick car indeed. In 1976, Peugeot took a 90% stake in Citroen and set up the PSA Group, which combined both Peugeot and Citroen. Now, a lot of people thought that was the end of interesting Citroens, but in 1982 came this, the BX. Okay, it had a joint Peugeot-Citroen engine, but it still had Citroen hydraulics, it was a distinctive shape, and it was a great car, and in diesel turbo form was immensely successful at introducing diesels to the mass market. My family bought 3 of them in a row. We thought they were absolutely great. The BX put Citroen squarely at the heart of the big volume car business, and to reinforce the identity of the brand, they started coming up with great adverts like this. Now, this is no computer generation. These are real horses galloping down real streets and across a real desert in the double chevron. Look very closely, you can just see the wires connecting the horses, but what a stunt, what a shot. It took them 8 days to get this one sequence. In 1986 came the AX, a collaboration with Peugeot, and in 1989, the XM. A new luxury model replacing the CX, XM was not one of the great sellers of all time for Citroen. They did have a few technical problems with them, but again, a great long-distance car. I remember driving a 3-litre 24-valve version from London to Barcelona against the clock to arrive in time for a television story, and we made it. In 1991 came the ZX series of cars to fit in between the AX and the BX. Called ZXs, but in fact absolutely nothing like them, either on the outside or under the skin, were these ZX Rally Raid cars. They were built to campaign in events such as the Paris-Dakar. Can you imagine what it must be like in one of these fearsome devices doing over 100 miles an hour straight across the middle of the Sahara? And now we're starting to come very much up to date. In 1993, the Xantia range was launched, and over the next 5 years, over 1 million were to be produced. Now, this car, the Xantia Activa, featured active ride suspension, and it's the best handling car, I think, I've ever driven, supercars included. This is my tip for a future classic. And you all know the rest. The Zara range, the outstanding success of Picasso, of Berlingo, the C5, and now the C2 and the C3.
My favorite Citroen car today would have to be the Pluriel, because to me it's so versatile, this car. You can have 4 different designs just by changing the roof, and there's no other cars today where you could do this.
These all different ways of being a single car you could find in a 2 chevaux. But it's not a retro design of the 2 chevaux, because you have to add the values that today a customer is expecting, and that obviously you don't have in terms of space, in terms of wideness at the elbow, in terms of safety, all these things that if you do a retro design, you would not obviously find.
French car design is very strong today in general, as the marque together with Peugeot in the PSR industrial production is very strong together. They are able and they show to have really good revolutionary designed 2 cars like the C3 and in special the C3 Pluriel. And everyone, I never saw that collectors before loved so much a new Citroen since 20 years. And I'm a bit longer in the Citroen scene, like the C3 Pluriel. Now I know many people who came from the 2CV, from the DS, and they love the C3 Pluriel because it's a completely modern car, but never they try, and it is good that they do so, to copy their own history. So this is what others do. a retro design is nothing what Citroen or PSR wants to make, and I found it very, very good decided to do so.
And bringing us bang up to date, this is the C8 with the latest in Citroen technology, telematics. And that means that the car not only talks to you, it can repeat your text messages to you if you've got your SIM card in the system, but it also controls the CD, the telephone, the navigation system, the onboard entertainment, you name it, it can do it. I wonder what Andre would have thought of all of this. So the company is still there at the cutting edge for technology and innovation, but for Citroen enthusiasts like me, nothing can quite match the glory days of the wonderful Traction Avant, the 2CV and the immortal DS. Goodbye.